So I love the fact that we're here today talking about something as simple as voice. And I even love the fact there's a conference about voice, because this is quite possibly, outside of sound, the longest form of communication that we've had as humans. And now we're talking about the disruption in this market and how we can do more with it, what I just think is just outstanding and exciting. But this isn't anything that's really new. Whoops. A little behind. There we go. Sorry, a little delay here on the teleprompters. But, humans, we've always sought connection. We've always thought of ways that we want to tell our stories, how we want to tell about our past, tell about what we're doing, educate, communicate. We seek this, we thrive off this. And if we go back through history, talk about, there's nothing new. We started, what did we have? We had sounds, we had speak, we had iconography, we had, everything dating back to, ruins. We moved to manuscripts. We've gone to printing and photography, the telephone. All ways in which we're getting to tell stories or create the memory that we're able to tell of what happened and where we were and how we lived our lives. We fast forward, even, more recent as the 1900s, we have radio, we have sound movies, we actually got movies, audiobooks, cellular tapes, all these sort of things. And again, allowing us to expand our communication, expand our voice, and make that there. Now we're going into more today. We got tablets, we have social media, allowing us to tell our stories, sometimes a little bit too much. Not everyone needs to tell everything on social media. And then, even what we were talking about yesterday and what JP at Vixen was talking about yesterday, even talking about the metaverse or, a digitally immersive world, we're talking about another distribution channel and another way that we can talk about these communications. But the only thing that's really ubiquitous through all these things is voice. It's being able to tell our stories. And now we're kind of at this inflection point with voice. So, there's a story that I heard when I joined at Veritone a little over 5 years ago, where someone was giving the analogy of using the mouse. And it always stuck with me. Because I remember back, date myself and some of the people in this room, like let's make 84 or 85, playing my first Apple computer, where I had that mouse that was a big brick with one button on that I'm just moving around. You can actually go over to the Natural History Museum and they have it there. I saw it this weekend, it's there. That makes you feel great about your age. But you're there, and I just remember how awkward it felt. I'm no longer using a function or a command key. I'm having to use this thing. And now we're like, okay, we're starting to control our lives with our voice, which is an incredible experience, an incredible way you can personalize your interactions. And it's just that the parallel and that inflection point is here today. Like how awkward it was to use the mouse, now to use the trackbar. Like, you can't think of using a mouse now without having to come through and use it. It's part of our everyday momentum and everyday movements. And voice is that same way. We just need to learn and educate ourselves on what that's going to be. But to think a little bit more about it, voice has always been here. It's always been a tool. If you go back, who remembers that speak and spell? Either yourself or maybe one of your kids had a speak and spell. Like, look, there was synthetic voice then, back in the 80s. E.T. phoned home on something of that here. You go back to any sci-fi fans, 2001, The Space Odyssey. There's the fictitious HAL 9000, being able to have that. We've always had these moments in our lives. We've talked about, like, how voice and computers and giving this to that. It's really exciting. And we talk about today, smart glasses, watches, TVs. I've been told that there are smart furnaces. Like, I live in California. That seems very foreign to me. I don't, really know what a furnace is anyway. But then smart homes and like a voice to the voiceless. Like you look at like Stephen Hawking's, using synthetic voice to continue his communication. And, it's exciting, and think of other ways that how you can expand upon that and expand and use that. In one of the keynotes yesterday, I think it was yours, JP, we talked about like how when you're talking about the metaverse and going through your smart glass and those, you're not going to be swiping your glasses, you're not going to be tapping something, you're going to be commanding these things with your voice. So it's very important that we start to understand the power that comes with that and how we can continually be able to personalize that experience. Because the more personal it is, the more useful it is, the more better user experience you're going to have. And let's face it, like this is already mainstream today. We hear about it from time to time, but like, for example, in The Mandalorian, they brought back, Luke Skywalker for the end scene of The Mandalorian, for those of you who may have seen it. But that wasn't Mark Hamill's real voice. That was a synthetically created version of Mark Hamill's voice, because the Mark Hamill today doesn't sound like the Mark Hamill of 1984 when he did that. Your voice changes as age, you grow older, things change. So being able to create a synthetic version of his actual voice, so that way it is consistent with the storyline themes, that's real today. There's been a whole lot of documentaries that have been made. CBS did a wonderful coverage on the whole notion of deepfakes. And let's just face it, deepfakes are a form of synthetic media. We take the stance at Veritone, and myself personally, that there's a big difference between a deepfake and synthetic voice or synthetic media. And that singular distinction is consent. If you're providing consent to have a synthetic voice of yourself made, if you're providing consent to be able to use that technology, you've not creating deepfake. Deepfakes is a knockoff. Deepfakes is someone pirating your information. Synthetic media is something where you're creating it yourself and you're giving the consent for it. So there's a great quote by Nina at CBS that said, "Technology itself is neutral. So just as bad actors are, without a doubt, going to use deepfakes, it's also going to be used by good actors." So first of all, I would say that there's a very compelling case to be made for the commercial use of deepfakes. And I could not agree more with this. Everyone can and will use it, and it's being used today. So the more that we can educate ourselves around the usage of it and having the right ethics around it and how we're going to govern it is important for us all. We're all here at the Voice Summit because we care about this topic. We care about the user experiences that come with this voice. And ethics has to be at the very forefront of what we're doing about it. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And, it was either Voltaire or Winston Churchill. I remember it as Uncle Ben from Spider-Man that said, "With great power comes great responsibility." And that's what I think we all have in this room and listening live streaming, is that's what we need to think about this when we're using this type of technology. So, ethically created content. Let's talk about that just for a quick second. Being able to have a synthetic use of your voice is important because you're able to distribute, you're able to monetize, you're able to protect your assets for this. If you're a person of notoriety, a CEO of a company, most of you saw Digital Chad or Chad 2.0 over the course of this time. Saw a quick video of the real Chad that was there for a moment. So you get to see the virtual version of him here in a few minutes. But being able to have that, because look, as an individual, we're only as extensible as our time. And if we want to be able to use it, be able to share information, be able to tell stories, be able to educate, to be able to teach, to be able to give other webinars where we don't necessarily need us here, they need a version of us or those or just our voice. We have that ability to be able to do that. So if you can think about it from an education perspective, that's incredibly powerful. If I was able to think about it personally, maybe I would read more, or I'd listen to more audiobooks if everything was read to me by James Earl Jones. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I used a couple of examples here. I would probably consume everything if Darth Vader was giving it to me. And just being able to have that accessibility, how much more people are going to interact, are going to use that experience to be able to engage with content. And so there are many use cases for good. And to talk about that, look, advertisers and agencies. At Veritone, we do run an advertising agency called Veritone One. They're a leader in audio and influencers. So they are leveraging trusted voices of talent, of individuals, of influencers. And, there's a constant struggle that agency has, as well as every other brand that has, is that your ability to be able to tell your stories through that person is limited to their ability to be able to get into a studio and talk about it. It doesn't mean that they don't want to talk about it. They just have to prioritize their time, just like we do in our everyday lives. So being able to have that ability to be able to say, you know what, I have a clone of my voice. I've given consent to a group to be able to make it. I'll give the authority or authorization for that usage of my voice to be for this specific use case. So again, if we can think about this as a collective industry, that we can talk about the consent to clone a voice, we can talk about the consent and being able to protect and govern and authenticate that voice, and then be able to make that a voice available to it, but it's still going to need the consent of that person's voice created to be used for that example. That's the stance that we take, and that's the stance firmly I personally believe that we need to make sure that we collectively protect against. Because it's up to us to make sure that we are stepping away from the notion of a deep fake and moving towards really synthetic voice or synthetic media. I want to give a real example here. Brian Barletta, who runs a podcast, a wonderful group called Sounds Profitable. For those of you who may or may not be familiar with the podcast space, it's incredibly fragmented. There's so much new technology that's coming about. There are so many new companies that are coming into the space. There are so many topics that are taking place. There's walled gardens popping up left and right. There's so much information out there to consume. He's taken it upon himself to distill this down and make weekly both news articles and podcasts educating the broader community. And so he'd come to Marvel and AI, and we talked about, hey, how can we do this for you? How can we help expand your voice? So we're looking about it. We created a very simple workflow, and we all can do it as well, is that we're taking his English voice. We're taking it down, we're translating it into Spanish language, and then we are turning it back into an actual, his voice, synthetically created to speak Spanish. So now you're getting to hear his voice, telling his stories, being able to educate the group, but to a whole nother language that he wasn't able to communicate to before. And so we wanted to give you a couple of those examples for it. So, here's his real voice. He's also in the room, so if you want to verify this as his voice, he's waving his hand. You can come out and talk to him later. But here's Brian's real voice.
Who doesn't love streaming? The idea of the media being fed to the consumer in real time, allowing the technology provider to interact with them at their time of consumption.
And then let's hear his same voice giving that same exact statement, Spanish.
¿A quién no le encanta la transmisión? La idea de que los medios se transmitan al consumidor en tiempo real, lo que permite al proveedor de tecnología interactuar con ellos en su momento de consumo en nuestro mundo de podcasting.
So, I don't speak Spanish. I'm going to assume that that is correct. But here's a little bonus. You've been hearing me talk for the last 15 minutes or so. I do not speak Spanish, but here's me attempting to speak Spanish via, synthetic voice.
Gracias a todos por escuchar mi plática fascinante o no tan fascinante.
Okay. The most terrifying of that is the self-realization of how nasally I sound. It bothers me to this day. I had to ask my wife and the people that I work with, is that really me? And they're like, yeah, well, yeah, that's definitely you. I'm like, great. So, but you can see of those ones here, like, look, I cannot teach anyone, I cannot tell a story in Spanish without the use of an interpreter. But here I have the ability to be able to educate, to be able to tell a story, to be able to give a talk like this, and actually being able to hear my voice dubbed over of actually me. Think about the ability of localization and personalization within film using this. If you're watching a program like Seinfeld, who's this big Seinfeld fan? Said me. Wonderful. It's always a safe show to pick. But Jerry Seinfeld, for example, Jerry Seinfeld of English is not Jerry Seinfeld of Italian. It's not Jerry Seinfeld of Germany. You're hearing a different person. But if you wanted to be able to have that, to be able to give the same inflection that Jerry Seinfeld would be able to give, here's an ability where you can take clones of actors and those voices, and to go back to Nina's statements a few slides ago about being able to use this for good actors or good actresses. Being able to take that and be able to share that is just another example of how this will begin to accelerate in mainstream, which is why, coming back to it again, like making sure that we have the ethics around it and the protection and governances around it, whether if it's Marvel or any other company out there, this is something that we all need to be aggressively talking about collectively and together as a group. So some of you met Digital Chad from those, he's my boss. There's a real one behind him too. There's so many ways that you can take his voice or anyone's voice, talk about adding a conversational AI engine, talk about adding an avatar into it as well. You can create extremely personal connections, being able to talk to someone. We just threw out a few, like a customer service, being able to have a person versus a chatbot, being able to educate, train, patient intake, recruiting, sales. I read through a study a while back that were talked about the whole thing around patient care. And it was really intriguing to me because they actually did a study where they had a digital form of audio and a real doctor. And they went to the two and did the same intake form. Which one do you think gave more information? Was it the live person or the digital? That's right. More people shared more information about what they were doing with using the digital person versus the real person. And they did that, and the thesis was, from that hypothesis, was that because there's not the fear of judgment, that even though you're at a doctor, because you're talking to a real person in that, that there's that inclination that I may feel judged. But if we're able to make that available where it's still, a version of your doctor being able to share that, be able to do that, would they potentially be able to give better care while they are in person? Potentially. And that's just something to think about. So our team put together a quick little demo to be able to showcase of what it would be like to just maybe even do an interview. Now this obviously is not going to work for a lot of roles, but say if you're in a company like, FedEx or Amazon or CVS or any of these companies right now that need to hire tens of thousands of people within a short period of time. Being able to run through these ones, being able to hear and have a conversation with them, albeit a digital version of them, but being able to maybe a quick round of easy, fresher questions before you get that. Maybe you can help cultivate that in a better experience. We'll just share a quick example of what that could look like.
Hello. Thanks for your interest in the warehouse associate role at Pando Demo. I'm Digital Chad, an AI recruiter hired to help Pando Demo grow their team. I ensure hiring teams have more meaningful human experiences with top talent. The purpose of this chat is to kickstart the interview process. Let's kick things off.
Great, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Chad. My name's Ashley.
I'd like to hear your elevator pitch. How would you describe yourself in 2 sentences or less?
I'm extremely detail-oriented, and I love to see projects through to the end.
Thanks for sharing. The warehouse associate will be an integral member of the Pando Demo team. You'll be responsible for providing leadership for the operation of business, including development and implementation of operational policies and procedures. How many years of experience do you have in warehousing?
Over 15.
Great. Tell me more about that. Where have you worked?
I've worked at FedEx, UPS, and more recently DHL.
Let's dive a little deeper into your experience. Tell me about your 2 main responsibilities in your last role.
I did inventory management and control, and then I also supervised merchandise inspections.
Awesome. Do you have experience with accounting?
Yes, I do.
I see. In past roles, have you worked with balance sheets?
Oh yes, every day.
Do you have experience with policy, planning, and strategy decisions?
I do, and usually I work very closely with the Human Resources Department.
Okay, tell me about a time when you made a mistake. How did you handle this experience?
One time I mixed up shelving, and so what I did to handle that is I actually brought in temp workers for the day, and we were able to quickly get things sorted so that we did not have any delays in delivery.
Understood. Here's a fun question. If you could have any superpower, what would you choose?
If I could have any superpower, I would love the ability to let anybody safely create a voice and avatar clone of themselves.
Nice.
So as you can see here in this one, you can have a little fun with this. Obviously, Ashley does not run a warehouse. She runs our marketing from those, but was able to put this together. But conversational AI and synthetic voice has allowed us to really push for a more human digital experience. And with all the talk around the quote-unquote metaverse and what that means, personally I feel that it's just another distribution channel for a company to be able to, or an individual to be able to share their stories, to be able to talk about their brands, to be able to talk about their experiences. This is combining all these assets so you can have a more realistic version of yourself and available and being able to tell those. So, as a brand or a company can use this technology to kind of overcome disruption in their space, have some consistency from their real world to their digitally immersive world. And being able to, again, do things at a scale and a rapid scale that is really challenging to be able to do with humans. For that, example of those interviews, that's probably your 10 first easy qualifying interviews. And instead of having to have a 30-minute phone conversation with each person, you can have as many of these running as time as you can compute and run through thousands of these at a time versus having to take months to get through those same thousands. So just being able to show the extensibility of us as humans we have if we're lending ourselves to our virtual selves. So our promise for good And again, I kind of want to pull this together around the whole thing of ethics and consent. You know, Open Voice Network has been here this whole time, John Stein and team, and a lot of incredible work around here. But we at Veritone and all of us need to take the usage of these applications incredibly seriously. We need to start thinking about this one, about while we're using this technology and cloning is incredibly important, it is a great responsibility. And that, you know, there are no shortcuts that should and can be taken within it, that we have to work together as a group to make sure that we're adhering to these. So if anyone here is not part of the Open Voice Network, I highly suggest that you come and see me, see one of my team members, go find John Stein that's here, reach out to him, and have a conversation, have a dialogue, hear what we're talking about, hear what we're trying to create, because again, like, we're the ones that are going to bring this to the forefront as a group, but we're also, if we're not careful, are the ones that can make a mess out of what we're trying to accelerate. So, big statement and takeaway at Veritone, really, and in any place here, is own your clone. You know, own the digital version of yourself, and that needs to be all of yourself. Your voice is your IP. You know, your name, image, your likeness, voice is a part of that. And you need to think about that seriously and about being those. If, like, especially here, like, I want to own that because, look, I am in a position where, you know, I have the ability to be able to, you know, do something at work and have other people do something potentially for me. Like, I need to make sure that if there's a synthetic version of myself, I own it. Because if someone's going to come here, there's a real ability to be able to spoof someone, to be able to do that. So own your clone, take this seriously, take it seriously more on behalf of yourself, on behalf of your customers, on behalf of individuals out there. You know, we're very passionate about this, both as a company, myself personally, a lot of my team is, and I just think it's something that we collectively need to just make sure we're talking a lot more about. And with that, I thank you guys so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure to be here with you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your show here.
Thank you.